Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is October 14, year 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Today's talk deals with an individual. Some would view him a celebrity. Perhaps those who are younger might not be aware of him or his situation. Whether you are or not, his work, which has primarily been in the area of cinema, has had a profound influence on the larger culture, not just the popular culture, but the culture in general, not just in the English speaking world, I would argue, but world culture. His films have been screened and viewed in practically every country that does not practice censorship. And he is widely held to be amongst experts, journalists, film scholars, as being one of the top directors of all time, if not current, the current age. And I'm going to be talking about some of the accolades that he's received, Roman Polanski, despite his record of violent abuse, particularly towards women. I don't know if he's perpetrated his crimes on boys or male victims, but certainly there have been any number of women who have accused him of, and he's admitted to a couple of cases of sexual abuse. Now, as bad as that is, just as I was putting the finishing touches on this talk today, I came across another insight that I think is going to cause the entire reevaluation of who Roman Polanski is and what Roman Polanski represents, because I see him more than this person who makes creepy movies like Rosemary's Baby, right? 1968, like The Ninth Gate, was it? Starring Johnny Depp, another one, right? 1999. Or his earlier film before Rosemary's Baby, which caught the attention of the international film community. I certainly saw it as a kid, well, an older teenager, college student. Repulsion, starring what was commonly believed back then to be the most beautiful woman in the world, Catherine Deneuve, right? French actress, great actress, by the way, but also quite beautiful. And that seems to be a pattern, of course, that Polanski has maintained all the way through his career. And anyway, I won't go through a review of his early films, but I should just state that at a very early stage in his career, he was identified as being a top 10. Oh, before I begin, all the way to film school, Polanski was seen as being, an up and comer. I just wanted to thank the people here are going to be treated to some incredible insights today. It's not going to be the same old of Roman Polanski or Rosemary's Baby, because I'll admit to you right off the bat that I was dwelling on that much too long. It's important, but I have a deeper insight for you here, because this is original material. This is not just YouTube rehash stuff and call it, analysis, right? Sean, welcome. Thermobsterful, hi. ECAT, hi. ECAT, I want to make you give you a wrench. I'll try to figure out how to do that if you're interested. Ayape, Melissa, welcome. Pyramid 7, yo, yes, it's not a name I've seen yet, but I've got mine. I've got my pyramid in the background. I don't know if you can see it. Corky, how are you? Sean, hello, Corky, it says. And who else is there? Oh, Kathy Sue, hey, great. And Salsa Norma, and I hope I'm not, Christopher Lee, the namesake of the great actor, right? Associated with a lot of horror films, right? Okay, and Michael Charlie, Melissa, I think I've name checked. Oh, Piper Fogel, hi, how are you? Good to see you. Vlad the Impaler Jones, Sean, I think I've said your name. Dystopian Deep Dive. Okay, that's the top of the list. So don't mean to, slight you if I didn't name check you, but we need to move on here. I'm sure you'll appreciate some of the brand new insights here that I'm about to reveal to you. Now, first of all, I don't really feel the need to go through the details of Roman Polanski's life or his trajectory, because we have Wikipedia, right? James Whale's operation, right? Whoever he works for, I don't know. James Whale, right? The genius behind Wikipedia, so-called. So you can go through that yourself. I'll just say that in 1977, Roman Polanski, he was already a well-known, famed, respected director by this time, was accused and charged with sexual misconduct directed toward an unidentified minor, a girl, 13 years old. Back then, I think it still holds here in the U.S. at least. People who are under age 21 back then, 21 was adult back in the 70s. It's been lowered to 18, I think, now. But anyway, people who are underage were if they were victims of a crime or even perpetrators of a crime, their name was not put, their identity was not put in newspaper or magazines or on television or anything like that. So that's why this book, this autobiography, which is quite good, is titled The Girl, right? She is the girl, the unidentified girl, subtitled A Life in the Shadow of Roman Polanski. And I'll have to say that this book was much more than I expected. It's kind of like the Amber Fry book that I read. I want to understand the women's POV, right? Point of view, right? I want to understand. I read all the material about Roman Polanski, this and that, but I want to read the insights of the people who were primary participants in whatever's going on. And fortunately, since we're and this is the good part of celebrity culture, I guess, and there is a big downside, as we'll talk about today. But one of the upsides of celebrity culture is that if you're involved in any way to some sort of celebrity, and especially where it concerns salacious events, scandals, hopefully, you're going to get a book deal, right? Or you're able to write your own book and don't even need a publisher. Now, in this case, Samantha Geimer, her agent, I assume she has a lawyer, so I assume she has an agent. Maybe he cut the deal for her, because you don't get contracts with the big boys unless you have an agent, and they take their 15-20%. But this is with a division, an imprint of Simon and Schuster books. It's called Atria or Atria. So it's not one of these create space books that you can get on Amazon. Not that they're bad. A lot of those books are really good, but this is from a mainstream corporate, who knows who owns them, probably Hachette or some publishing monopoly, right? But this is a reputable trade publisher. And you can bet, since there are all these different names, she names names in this book, that their attorneys, the company attorneys, went through it very carefully and vetted it to make sure that there's no libel, no scandal or slander or any other potentials for a lawsuit, even though I'm sure there will be some, or if not already, will be some legal repercussions. And I don't think she's going to make a fortune out of this. You rarely make any money writing books unless you're J.K. Rowling or whoever, some best-selling author, right, of mass market books. But she is doing, and I'm explaining this because I happen to believe her, Samantha Geimer. And remember, she's writing this book not as a 13-year-old, but she's writing this book from the perspective of a woman who's in her 50s, who has 3 grown children. She's been married a few times, but her current husband, they've been together for 20-25 years. They live in Hawaii on the island of Maui, and she's very stable and established and seems to be very much at peace with her life, her station, her family, and they're all very much supportive of writing this book. But her main motivation was just to clear the record about what this incredible scandal for its time. Now we're used to scandal, right, in 2021, but in 1977 when this hit, and this is before OJ hit in 1995, that kind of really was the game changer. This is when TMZ and Harvey Levin, rather, who started as an attorney, by the way, and any number of people, just started piling onto this whole celebrity deal. And there were paparazzi before that, sure, certainly, but it became an industry into itself. So she was prior to the big explosion of celebrity sleuthing and celebrity chasing, right? But she wants to clear the record, and I'm going to take her at her word. There are some minor contradictions here that I found in her book, but but by and large, I don't think they're as important as her contribution, Geimer's contribution, to really throw aside all the people, both professionals and your amateur, and YouTube is full of people like that, right? I was watching this documentary on the mysterious death of Elisa Lam at the Hotel Cecil, or Cecil as they call it, in Hollywood. It's a good Netflix series, by the way. I was watching a little bit of it the other day. Season 1, 4 episodes. I binge watched it. But you have all these creepy people on YouTube who they just take this glee, this joyful delight in people's misery, and that's not what I want to do here. I'm engaged in looking at Roman Polanski because he represents larger political currents, international political currents, as I am discovering just prior to going live here with you people. I don't mean to tease you like that, but just hang on to the end of this hour, and you will be amply rewarded, I promise you, or your money back. Speaking of which, join my Patreon so I can do more of these deep dives. For example, I want to buy a Polanski film that I didn't even know existed, and it's going to be crucial to my building out of this incredible insight that I came across. It's a $28 DVD. It's not available on Netflix. I can't watch it. It's not even listed on Netflix. And you have to ask the question, why? Why is this 2000? I can't remember. It's called J'accuse, right? After the famous letter by Émile Zola, right, to the newspaper in defense of a French Jewish officer who was accused of treason, and it had a main anti-Semitic subtext, or not subtext, but it was one of the main issues of his being put up on trial. And Roman Polanski directed this. There have been other versions, but he directed one of the more recent versions. And I have to see that because I think the material was either selected for him or handed to him, or he chose it because he is very similar to, I guess he was Captain Dreyfus, Alfred Dreyfus, that is falsely accused. And Polanski's Polish Jew, so and he also grew up in France. He's a French citizen. His parents emigrated from Poland to France, and they went back supposedly to Krakow, Poland, right before the invasion by the Third Reich, right? And Poland, fell eventually to the Germans in World War II. And you know what happened to Polish Jews in World War II, or at least you have a general idea that I don't have to go through it. And by the way, I'll just tell you right up front, the more I read about Polanski, the more I'm disbelieving his legend that follows him around. And his legend, this is what CIA calls for backstory or histories or biographies, pseudo. They built a legend around everything. It's the wilderness of mirrors, right? So far as biographies are concerned. So I'm right now I'm not a full skeptic, but I'm a heavy skeptic about all the biographical information about Roman Polanski. The fact that his parents went right into the heart of the impending Holocaust of the Jewish population of Poland, and that his family, and not to minimize it, this is where the biographers, this is where the academic scholars need to go, or amateur journalists from Poland who can read the records in Polish language. That would be wonderful. Great example of international cooperative research. We need that. But I'd like to have someone go through the records of that vintage, if they weren't destroyed purposely or by accident, and find out about the Polanski family, and also the family of his mother. I don't know her maiden name. I've never seen it anywhere. And then we have to go back 2 or 3 generations to see who the Polanski bloodlines really are. And I've already showed on this channel, the Professor Hamamoto YouTube channel, that you do a little digging and you come up with some very interesting connections. And a lot of it, at least for me, comes out of instinct. And it's instinct born of years and years and years and too many years of reading and research and understanding the deep history. And I call it cultural forensics, copyright. And I showed you that Joan Rivers' husband, Edgar Rosenberg, was a Warburg of the Warburg banking family, right up, up near Rothschild land, right? And I showed to you that the celebrity chef, Anthony Bourdain, his father was a member of the French Sûreté, which is like MI6 or CIA, and he was over in Indochine, which we now know as Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, in order to run heroin, right? International heroin drug trade. It's not just America, ladies and gentlemen. I don't care what all the Five Eyes countries people, the Canadian commentators who are all, and the New Zealanders who are always in American shit, right? Talking about our awful history, or French commentators, and non-American, and I'm a third generation American and I can't talk about this. Oh, double standard. Time and time again, my instincts are borne out, and I think the Polanski legend is about to be shattered. I'm not saying I have the definitive information on it. Perhaps you here will add to the new revisioning of Roman Polanski, right? And it's about time, because we just hear and this is my main gripe about YouTube and the so-called experts who call themselves, analysts or whatever, however they represent themselves. You can hang your shingle out. I really don't care. But what it does is suck oxygen away from legitimate and serious work that's here for more than just and it is entertaining. I'll grant you that. But that's not my primary focus here. I want to understand what people like who are put out there, like Roman Polanski, what function they serve so far as the international banking cabal and the New World Order and its manifestations, such as the Pentagon, DARPA, and of course, the granddaddy of them all now, the Mac Daddy, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And I'll just go ahead and tell you right now, and I'll just kind of build this because, I'm afraid of running out of time before I give you the money shot, as they call it in Hollywood. My hypothesis, my new working hypothesis, which I'm sharing with you, ladies and gentlemen, all the way live, is that one Roman Polanski, international film genius, right, is a intelligence asset. More specifically, he's playing a double game between what was known as the Eastern Bloc, right? Because he was born in Poland. He's born and raised. He's a French citizen, but he was born and raised in Poland. That's his mother country. And as were his parents, or he might have been born in France. I forgot, but he has deep roots in Poland. Not just affectionate roots, not just romantic connections, but real material ones. I'll just tell you very quickly. There is a Polish, primarily Polish Jewish. They might be Galicians. They might be, Franco-Sabbateans. There's that string we gotta check out, because it's very strong in Hollywood, which I'll talk about in a moment. Well, I'll not talk about it. I'll just talk about it right now. Angelica Houston was at the house that greeted Samantha Geimer and Roman Polanski. Then she split, and that's when he raped her by his own admission, by the way. I'm just saying. And he was convicted for sexual misconduct after that. Or there was a plea bargain. All right. I'm not going to go into the legal minutia of this. You can look at that yourself. But that was Angelica Houston was at the Jack Nicholson home where this quote unquote photo shoot took place. And the photo shoot was a pretext, it seems to me, to seduce and to sexually assault. It was rape, anal rape, and she was drugged with I can't remember the brand name, but it was, a sleeping pill, let's call it generically. She was given some wine or champagne, and she's 13 years old. She's tiny, and she didn't have any experience drinking or hardly any experience at all, and Polanski took advantage of that. But Angelica Houston, who was for a time the girlfriend of Jack Nicholson, who was later cast as Jake Gittes in Chinatown, which Roman Polanski directed, as most of you know, right? Great film, by the way. So's Rosemary's Baby. Don't hate me for liking it. I have a problem with Polanski. I don't have a problem with the films, because the films are not the director's property. Chinatown, for example, is every much as a bit of Robert Towne's film as it is of Roman Polanski. And Robert Towne wrote the script. It's probably one of the greatest scripts we've ever seen. And there's all these articles about how they kind of cobble together and all the different drafts and all that. I have great respect for Robert Towne. I haven't found anything creepy about him. I do know that he has a very deep understanding of history, and he probably knows a lot more than I'd be able to tell you here today. And I'm looking for more autobiographical insights provided by Robert Towne himself before he passes on, or scholars, because I think that particular moment in Hollywood film history, international celebrity culture, that was a crucial moment when the so-called New World Order, for lack of a better term, really got its grip, its final toehold to take us to 2021. So Roman Polanski was one of these transitional people who completely helped pimp out, quote unquote, Hollywood, from old Hollywood to the new corporate Hollywood. And what do I mean by that? This is a lot of detail for you. I'm not going to apologize, because this history is much more rich than you'll see on other YouTube presentations. But what do I mean by the global culture? Well, Chinatown, who financed that? It was a guy named Charlie Bludhorn, who I believe was a German-born national. I don't know what his nationality was by the time he died, because someone quibbled with me. I mentioned that the Bee Gees were Australian. They said, "Oh, no, the Bee Gees are English. They were born in England." Well, the fact is that they might have been born in England, but they immigrated to Australia, and they grew up there, and they became famous as the Brothers Gibb, I guess, or the Bee Gees, whatever it is, before they went back to London and started to be groomed literally by Robert, who later became Sir Robert Stigwood. That's in a previous talk I gave about the queering of British pop, right? It was the Lavender Mafia that created a lot of those groups. So I'll just cut me some slack here if Polanski was actually born in France and not in Poland. But the fact is that he and Charlie Bludhorn, I think he had a thick German accent, like Heinz Kissinger. He's a Kissingerian type of person, Charlie Bludhorn. You don't hear his name. We always hear Kissinger. It's always the same. Well, Rothschild, Rockefeller. It's like an echo chamber. Can we just expand the playing field a little bit here? So check out Charlie Bludhorn. He was the CEO of Gulf and Western. If you don't know what Gulf is, that's as in Gulf Oil and Western. It was a giant globalist, ostensibly an energy company. But if you're in an energy, oil, nuclear, whatever it might be, natural gas, and now solar, you're going to, by necessity, or if you're in the extractive industries, minerals, right, gold, silver, copper, you're going to be in intelligence, right? Your monopoly, your position of strength and your role in industry is going to be protected by thugs on the one hand, like the Pinkertons, and the great detective fiction writer. I just call him writer. Dashiell Hammett was once a Pinkerton detective, right? You're going to be involved in intelligence, so far as thugs and Pinkerton type people, right? And they're, very much with us today. And then you're going to be involved in what they call human intelligence on the other end. So that's Charlie. And you're going to be also shaping the culture. So Charlie Bludhorn, who was the CEO of Gulf and Western, say, okay, we're going to invest in movies. I think they bought Paramount Studios. So they became Paramount. It's gone on to new hands now, I guess. But the point is that Chinatown was first and foremost a story that was going to be owned, operated, and put into play by a giant New World Order entity called Gulf and Western. That's why I refer to Chinatown as not being about Chinatown. It has nothing to do with Chinamen, too. You notice that? Just like, American problems, you have these demagogues here that they say, oh, it's the Chinese social score, not like we don't have one American social score, right? Or it's it's like a North Korean system. Why do you have to lay it on the yellow people? What about our oppressive system? We don't even have to name check North Korea or the Chacom. We are like the center of it, and I think the sooner that we remove these little racial distractions from it, like Like these people say, "Oh, we're doing racial divide." Well, you're responsible for it. You're one of the biggest perpetrators of the racial divisions, and you know who you are because you're watching this show. Because I see my material gravitate and show up into people, and content on your site. You have millions of people watching. I only have, 7,000 subscribers, but that's cool because it's the ideas, it's the material, and it's the books and the media that are going to come out of these developments that I'm putting through here that are going to win the day in the long run. So Chinatown is, and by the way, Robert Town himself didn't want the movie to end in Chinatown. He says, "You're taking it literal. Chinatown's a metaphor. It's not the place that I'm talking about." And Town was I'm talking about the screenwriter, Robert Town. He was sympathetic to it because he grew up in San Pedro, California. San Pedro is right around Long Beach, LA Harbor, where all the dope comes through and the human trafficking. And, it's a port city. And Robert Town said, I think he sat for an interview with the Screenwriters Guild West talking about this. He grew up in San Pedro and he saw all these Italian nationals. These are POWs who were captured, during World War II. You saw them running around freely in San Pedro and they were supposedly prisoners of war or POWs. At the same time, American citizens, my people, Japanese Americans, were rounded up wholesale. They were mostly fishermen, like the Portuguese. It was a very multicultural, it's Italians, Sicilians, whoever, people who come from a fishing culture went to and worked for the tuna factories. There was canning, and I visited the canneries when I was a kid. They were still in operation back then. But my people were, contrast to the Germans and the Italians that were allowed to run around, supposedly enemy aliens. My people were rounded up and taken to concentration camp. All right. And we are in a total global concentration camp right now. So let's not put it off on the NOCOs, the North Koreans, or the Chacoms. Because we here in America have many, many examples of this. And what's going down today hardly comes as a surprise to me. I'm not happy about it, but I have a historical understanding and appreciation of this budding terror state that we are seeing growing in the bowels of the American Republic, right? Like cancerous cells. And I'm arguing that Roman Polanski was very much part of this, even though he might not realize it, but he was creating this culture of evil. He was helping to normalize it and to bring it into the mainstream so that we could worship it. And its brainchild, which happens to be Lucifer. Check out the Ninth Gate there. And again, I'm going to say that I, like most people, if not all, was looking at strictly Roman Polanski's scary horror films, right? Scary movie, like Rosemary's Baby, right? Or The Ninth Gate. And I did not look at his more recent J'accuse, which I'm going to have to watch because, as I stated, I am fairly, it's more than a hypothesis. Let's call it a strong hypothesis. I'm pretty sure that Polanski was playing all these different angles related to intelligence. And one of the reasons why he was this is a movie, right? It's a movie within a movie. It's a hyper movie. It's a Truman Show. It's the Polanski Show. The reason why he was put in to take all this attention on rape of women, and I'm not discounting it, I'm not minimizing, I'm not trivializing it, but the reason why he was cast in that role is because that's where all the attention is going to go. Everybody likes a sex scandal, right? Everybody wants to look at Ed Buck, who drugged and lured gay black men to his apartment in West Hollywood, drugged them and raped them, and now he's finally in prison. But his running buddies are still around there, right? Ted Lieu, Adam Schiff, and the list is long and extensive. So that's one of the functions of the Polanski theatrical significance here. All right. And in the academic world, they say, well, gee, how can we really reconcile the fact that there's this guy who's been such a malignancy on American society, world culture, by being a sex criminal running around free and getting accolades. Yeah, I understand that argument, but it's been rehearsed so many times. That is too has become a distraction. And in fact, I found a recent article. Let me cite it real quick. That is still revisiting this whole idea of Roman Polanski. Here it is, and to show you how serious it is, even amongst egghead types. This was published in 2019 in the Journal of the American Philosophical Association. Wow, that's really ponderous sounding, isn't it? The Journal of the American Philosophical Association. This is not the Journal of Popular Culture or Cineast or whatever it might be, yeah, Cahiers du Cinéma or whatever, but this is a philosophical journal. And here it is. It says, when artists fall, honoring and admiring the immoral, the abstract. Is it appropriate to honor artists who have created great works, but who have acted immorally? In this article, after arguing that honoring, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is 2019. We've heard that argument for decades now, where it concerns not just people like Roman Polanski, but someone like, this might be a more familiar example, Leni Riefenstahl, right? She directed Triumph of the Will and then Olympiad. It's a glorification of the Third Reich body and the Third Reich Politik. And people are still writing journal articles about it, right? Because, it's safe, right? And we can take the moral high ground. It's like being a Karen, one of those scolds. There's academia is full of Karen types. Their terminology is a little bit more specialized, but they're basically Karen types. They're moralists. They really don't care, but they want to be on the right side of the mask, so to speak, if you catch my meaning, if you catch my drift, right? So I'm not going to belabor that point. First of all, let me compliment Judith Newman, who was she's credited and not on the cover, but inside it's with Judith Newman. And I compliment her because she was, and this is what was so great about the book for me, was that she was able to, because remember, Samantha Geimer was only 13 years old. She's a kid. She doesn't know what's going on in the 70s. You're living in kid land and whatever kids were doing, probably watching a lot of TV and doing Little League or whatever it was, that listening to the Beach Boys. That's probably one of the big activities there. But you don't know who Robert Evans is. You don't know who Charlie Bluhdorn is. But it comes out in the book. That's where I got it. Charlie Bluhdorn, Robert Evans. And I think that's the editorial and the research expertise of Judith Newman coming into play here. Because this book is more than a perspective, I was victimized and I was a little stupid kid and we smoked a lot of dope and, I had sex with my teenage boyfriends and blah, blah, blah. There's some of that in there, but most of it is about the 70s and about the sexual culture there. And it provides the rationale why Samantha Geimer refused to be what she called the ideal victim. She refused victimology. And we're living in 2021 now, aren't we? And we've seen a run-up for maybe, I started noticing it about really, really big about 10 years ago at the university, because that's where I was workshopped, right? But we're in a victimage culture now. And so she's swimming against that grain. She says, no, I was not a victim. I was victimized. He did commit rape against me, and he admitted to it, Roman Polanski. And she later sued him as an adult, and there was a private out-of-court settlement. I don't think, again, she was mercenary about it. I think she wanted to make a point to Roman Polanski, stop bringing up my name, because he wrote an autobiography, and he was rewriting the history the way she knew it and experienced it. So she took him to court. And I think part of the deal was, Roman Polanski, just shut your mouth, right? Let me live my life. Leave me alone. I have a family. I've grown up. You have a family. You have kids. Let's close the door. I'm not going to call for your arrest. I'm not going to call for your incarceration. You've paid your price, whatever it might have been, and I'm satisfied with it, but just keep me out of it. So, and I respect that position. It's a very mature one. It's a very nuanced one. She could have played the victim, Samantha Geimer, and she could have gotten on the page of the cover of People magazine and interviewed, by the magazines, both women's magazines, special magazines, and the mainstream. Rolling Stone, of course, would have to chime in because they're a globalist, politically correct publication. And Vanity Fair would have to chime in, all of them, and maybe Anna, what's her name, Wintour would feature in one of her fashion magazines, and then she'd go out because she would have served her purpose. So Samantha Geimer, by now, after being the girl, right, the anonymous girl, 13-year-old, for decades now, she's in her 50s, she's probably pushing 60 by now, realized that she all for all those decades, she was just a tool. She was just a symbol. No one really cared about Samantha Geimer. She was just a convenience, a medium by which, for example, the judge who originally presided over the case, his name was Rittenbauer. Let me see here. His name, I don't want to mangle. Yeah, Judge Ritzenband. I think it was Lawrence J. Ritzenband, who was, and he was a total celebrity whore. He would talk. This came out later on. He would admit it. He would talk to the friends at the Hillcrest Country Club. It was all Jewish members, by the way, because back in the early days of Hollywood, there was a strict division between Jews and Gentiles so far as social relationship. And if you were in a golf club, Pasadena, whatever, you got to be a goy. If you're in the Hillcrest Country Club, you have to be a Jew. Notice they didn't. Both clubs didn't let Orientals in, right? Maybe they let my dad in, but only to mow the lawn and to clip the the Japanese gardener, which, by the way, shows up in Chinatown. It's the Japanese gardener who finds these eyeglasses in the little pond that allows Jake Gittes to put it all together, what he's really going after. Thank you, Robert Town. That's an homage to the people that you saw with your own eyes being taken out of San Pedro and taken to one of the American concentration camps. And I don't think I'm reading too much into it. Robert Town is one of the great writers of our times. Screenwriter, writer, they're all the same to me. He's made some great movies. And yeah, okay, you want to credit Roman Polanski? I'll credit Chinatown to Robert Town. Okay, so you got the judge, you've got the celebrity lawyers. She name checks Gloria Allred. You know who that is, right? And her daughter's in the family business now. She has a different name, but you know who Gloria Allred is, man. She's there. And one of you, check me on this. I was talking about Amber Fry, right? The jilted lover of Scott Peterson, who killed his wife and his unborn son, Lacey Peterson, and Connor Peterson. I gave a short reading about Amber Fry. And when you caught it, she said, "Oh yeah, I wanted to feel sorry for her, but hey, Amber Fry's attorney is Gloria Allred." I said, "Well, you're right. We got to put a little question mark there about her motives, right?" So, but she names Gloria Allred. I don't know if Gloria Allred is going to sue her or not. She's the queen of lawsuits, celebrity lawsuits, high profile lawsuits. And I really appreciated the fact that Samantha Geimer also name checked Nancy Grace, another former lawyer turned a journalist like Harvey Levin. Nancy Grace, she is a disgrace. Oh man, does she still even have a show? She was big at a certain point, and I do recall watching her show. I don't know if I've ever watched one all the way through. And I remember there was a woman, she was a Korean American adoptee, Melissa, I forgot her name. She was so distraught after Nancy Grace almost accused her on air on her show of killing her own son, her own baby. Melissa, I forgot her name. I have her file here someplace. And she killed herself. And I think her families are sued her for that. And I think Nancy Grace has had to pay out, during the course of her career, a pretty hefty sum against families who've been libeled. But it doesn't matter because she's still a celebrity, quote unquote journalist, quote unquote lawyer, and you're not. You're just Samantha Geimer. You're a Geimer in their eyes. Oh, by the way, I want to give due credit to Rona Barrett. Rona Barrett was a celebrity. I think she was on ABC, KABC, Los Angeles television station, news station. And she had a segment when I was watching a lot of TV back then, or more than I do now. I don't watch any television. And I always thought she was just sort of a cheap sensation monger, but she contacted Samantha Geimer's family and asked to interview her and her family, and they declined, and she never bothered them after that. Most of them would just hound them. They put the paparazzi out there. They would follow them around with cameras, have blacked out vans and film them. And I mean, they were harassed to a degree that most of us could only imagine, right? So hats off to Rona Barrett. She has a lot more class than I imagined. Now, I was disappointed. I'm going from notes that I took off of this book. I'm disappointed in Sue Mengers. She was the super agent. She was the agent of people like Jack Nicholson and other people. Maybe, she probably knew Robert Evans, if not represented him. They were all in the same network. And she denounced Roman Polanski early on for his attack on Samantha Geimer, whose name wasn't known. But then she later backed off on that and supported Polanski. But, it's you don't want to be an outlier if you're talking about business. And I read the Sue Mengers biography. She's a super agent of all the directors, not all, but a lot of the powerful directors, filmmakers, screenwriters. And it didn't end very well for her. She died fairly, well off, but she was friendless. She had very few people even cared because, they were in it for their own self advancement in the business. By the way, though, this is not the only example. I've seen it read in different sources. Jack Nicholson seems to be he's a stand-up guy. If you want a friend, he's never going to rat you out or betray you or stab you in the back. He's with you all the way. I'm not saying he's a good guy. I'm just saying he has this old school loyalty that many, if not most men had. We did have a code of loyalty. We didn't snitch. We didn't rat. We didn't turn our back on our friends. You were always going to support your family and your community and your country too. I mean, patriotism is an extension of this larger bedrock American manhood, which has been neutered through the psychologists and the psychiatrists and the therapists who've now infiltrated and created dry rot in the universities. And that leads me to another point. The psychiatrists and psychologists are all over in the Geimer case, right? They were doing evaluations of Polanski. They were doing evaluations of Geimer. And some of the best passages in the Geimer book were when she's criticizing the psychiatrists, the therapists, the psychologists. She said these were just dirty old men who did for a living, took the transcription, and there were a couple of good ones that were on her defense team, but most of them were working for a voyeuristic, celebrity-saturated, quote-unquote, criminal justice system. They weren't scientists. They weren't interested in Samantha Geimer, her rehabilitation, her care, her comfort. They just wanted to work for whoever was contracting them to either defend or to prosecute the case. Again, she was being Geimered, if I could use her name as a verb. She was just a convenience for these people, with a couple of exceptions, by the way. And there's a long excerpts of some of their evaluations that are included here so that we don't have to just take her interpretation. We can read the pseudoscientific assessments of these so-called mental health specialists, right? You can tell I don't have put a lot of confidence in people of that division of the medical establishment, and others as well. As hopefully I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, here's a part of the book that she's not aware of that I picked up on that is certainly a thread that we might explore, you and me, if you have interest in writing about this or speculating about it beyond just the entertainment value. But her mother and her immediate family in general were this is 70s now, 1970s California, Los Angeles, California. They were very much into the therapies, the pop therapies of the day. Remember the previous talk I gave on on Brian Wilson, right? He had this guy, again, another a therapist, uh, Dr. Eugene Landy, who moved in with him and took over his life for a few years. Well, Geimer's mother and her family were into, especially her mother, because she was also an aspiring actress, right? And acting is a really uncertain field, to put it mildly, right? So you're always trying to, you're always kind of unstable and trying to figure out what's going to happen next, and it's a very insecure position for even for insecure people. So she was into Gestalt therapy. She was into Fritz Perls. And those of you who are old enough probably read a lot of the material. I certainly read a lot of this stuff. J. Krishnamurti, who was around probably in her parents' generation or grandparents. He was been around since the 30s and 40s, right? And her mother, according to Samantha Geimer, spent a week in the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. Many of you know about the Esalen, right? This is where people like Buckminster Fuller, right? Remember Buckminster Fuller? Well, you should. You hear about graphene recently? He's, the buckyballs is named after him, Buckminster Fuller, the geodesic dome. And Linus Pauling, right? 2-time Nobel Prize winner. He was an Esalen person. And she also talks about her mother's it's kind of unclear, but she had some kind of relationship with this sort of a Keith Raniere type people. America is the land of cults. It really is. It's the American Gothic. It's the collegiate Gothic connection that goes back to the pre-colonial or the colonial times, pre-Republic times. Mel Lyman, he was head of the Fort Hill community in Boston. I think sometimes they called him the family. Mel Lyman, I think, is profiled in the book called Mindfuckers that was published by Straight Arrow Press, which was an imprint of the Rolling Stone when it was still run by Jan Wenner before it went globalist. So she comes out at me loose. So I'm thinking, my gosh, Samantha Geimer might have not been aware that she was one of these children that the cults sexually exploit. She doesn't pick up on that. I don't know if the writer, the co-writer that I mentioned, what's her name, Judith Newman, is kind of leaving that out or didn't pick up, but I certainly picked up on it. And there's a chance that perhaps there was a cult connection, an occult and an occult connection where it comes to her involvement, brief though it was, with Roman Polanski. I'm talking about Samantha Geimer. And certainly we know in the creative work of Roman Polanski that the cult and the occult looms quite large, as I mentioned at the top of this talk, right? Okay, so you're like many people, you're critical of Samantha Geimer. You think that her mother was an aspiring actress who was pimping out her daughter. These are all the stories that are going around, and she addresses them in every moment. And you think that she was maybe a advanced, sophisticated, older-looking 13-year-old that Polanski misidentified as an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old. But she doesn't use any of those excuses. She doesn't want to be the ideal victim. Let me read, just so you know, I'm not interpreting. These are her own words from Geimer very quickly, because I don't like to read long passages here, right? Quoting, this is about the 1970s sex culture. It says, if you were between 13 and 45 in the 70s, this is how it was. And I was around at that time, and I pretty much agree with her characterization of it. In other words, it's not this Karen sex culture that we see in 2021, which, by the way, doesn't really care about your sex, your sexuality, or you being abused or exploited. It's about people taking the quote unquote, the fake moral high ground to advance themselves as therapists, as people who are running for office, as presidents, whoever it is, academia is ripe for these people because they have nothing to offer except fake moral high ground position. So here's 1970 sex culture, according to Samantha Geimer. There was something considered generally positive about erotic experience then, even in the absence of anything beyond sex itself. The idea was that emotional growth came about through an expanded sexuality for both the person in power and the relatively powerless. This is important to consider because this is the cultural paradigm Roman Polanski was sopping up in 1977. As wrong as he was to do as wrong as he was to do what he did, I know beyond a doubt that he didn't look at me as one of the victims. Not everyone will understand this, but I never thought he wanted to hurt me. He wanted me to enjoy it. He was arrogant and horny, but I feel certain he was not looking to take pleasure in my pain. Okay, she says that, but she also, in the next paragraph, says, but I was in pain. I still remember an afternoon soon after the rape when I was feeling, I guess you would say, bottled up. I took out a razor blade. I started making teeny tiny cuts on the inside, and it goes into this self-harm area, which I'm not going to go into it, both in the interest of time. But you know what happens. But it's so she was hurt, but she doesn't want to lay it all on the step of Roman Polanski, who she does agree did her a great harm and injustice. All right. So here's her rationale. She said she wanted to take control of her life. She said she wanted to experience sex for its own sake, for its own pleasure, and was not going to fall in the trap of just moving away from sex and seeing that, and feeling that she was worthless because she had been raped. She was going to embrace her sexuality in spite of Roman Polanski, not because of, but in spite of him. All right. So it's a very nuanced, and I'm not doing her argument justice here. It's much more nuanced than I'm representing here. But I'm just telling you this so that you do not come to a premature judgment and assessment of our argument. And I had my prejudices before I even, picked up the book. And like I said, I was gratified that she and her writers and her attorney, who also deserves, his name's Larry Silver, who also deserves a acknowledgement, who's been with her for close to 40 years. He was defending her family and her as an unknown, or let's say unidentified 13-year-old. He was in that early and stuck with her all those years because Polanski's name kept coming back and resurfacing. He's arrested here. There's all this controversy, surrounding him throughout his entire life. He's pushing 90 years old. He's still making movies, ladies and gentlemen. And I will say, though, I do agree that he's a violent criminal that very well should be repudiated by people in his professions. And that's to their credit, because we always hear about the Hollywood as being this den of iniquity. Yeah, it is. But there are some people that still have their heads screwed on straight in all institutions, right? So don't ever give up hope. But the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, that is, the people that give out the Oscar, the Academy Award every year, the Academy revoked Roman Polanski's membership in 2018. I mean, it took them a long time to do it, but they did finally, because the times changed, right? We finally understand as a culture society, we grew saying, this is not right. This is not appropriate. This has to stop. We're gonna really push forward in making sure that people are sovereign in their own bodies. They cannot be attacked. They cannot be molested. They cannot be raped. They cannot be murdered. No one outside of them can or should or is going to be allowed to do them harm. And that holds true right across the board, whether it's a slap, a closed fist, administering drugs, alcohol, or a needle. Okay. That's a very important lesson for 2021. Our bodies, ourselves. That was the title of one of those books in the 70s that Samantha Geimer was probably being exposed to. She talks about her reading, and she was reading about sexuality and the sexual freedom and the post-counterculture opening up of sexuality, the beginnings of the gay rights movement. She doesn't write about that, but that's the 70s, right? And she was part of that cultural shift. But at the same time, there's this recognition that, hey, everybody, man, woman, children, and all sentient beings and animal life are sacred, and we are individually and collectively responsible for the protection and the nurturance of all these different God-given beauties in our world against people who conspire constantly. I mean, they have the heart of evil, right? They are of their father, the devil. The people who conspire to wrest that innocence away and to violate it and to despoil it just as a matter of sadistic pleasure, right? And get people who are quote unquote normal to go along with the program. They might necessarily go convert to full on Luciferianism, but they're going to consent to it. They're going to go along with all the different acts of humiliation and ritual satanic abuse in 2021. However, we're seeing signs that the pilots are not having it. A lot of people in the military today are not having it. People working in the hospitals, they're not having it. So let's celebrate that reality. We don't need to look very much farther than our own neighbors to see people like Samantha Geimer who are saying, no, you're not gonna do this. You're not gonna get away with it. We have the power of the pen. We've got the written word. We have the power of individual and collective intelligence to support us and to get our message across. Okay, before I wind up here, as I announced it at the top, my working hypothesis is that Polanski, in addition to being what many believe a genius filmmaker of our age, his primary function is that of intelligence asset, who amongst the glitterati are able to move from country to country with nary a inspection without raising any suspicion. But your scientists, your creative artists, your rock stars, and people like one Roman Polanski. All right, for one, and these might be circumstantial, but I think these are leads that will go into the complete rethinking of Roman Polanski as being more than just the director of Rosemary's Boo Boo. Okay, he's much more than that, or the a grieving widower of Sharon Tate, and I don't mean to trivialize that, but that's typically how he's represented, right? And that's why we cut him a lot of slack. We meaning John Q. Public. So, speaking of Sharon Tate, her father was a colonel in the U.S. Army, right? Why was Sharon Tate mated with Roman Polanski? He was, he was, going up in the world so far as the director is concerned, but he hadn't reached his pinnacle yet. And Sharon Tate was really doing these really kind of cheesy television walk-on roles and not really hadn't hit the big time in film. She was about to. I've seen her in some other. I can't remember what it is. It's a film with Alec Guinness. It takes place in a Gothic castle in the French wine country. I can't remember the title. It's really good though. So she had a lot of potential there. But so there's that military connection at an officer level between Sharon Tate and the U.S. military, because this is ultimately we're talking about intelligence, right? We're talking about military intelligence, military corporate intelligence. So I'm questioning, as I said in the outset, whether the biographical points, the data points of Roman Polanski, whoever he is even real. Yeah, and that's for Polish scholars who can read the language, and for people who can read French, official documentary French in Pali, or whether the archive is, to find out who the Polanskis are going back 2 or 3 generations. And there are a couple of reasons, very briefly, before I end here, why there's a Polish connection here. You all know about Mikhail Golanowski. He was in Polish intelligence. He's the guy that blew the cover of these Russian illegals, as they're called, they're spies. And there's a new book on it published in 2021 about Polish intelligence connection. And by the way, Polish intelligence, when you hear Polish and intelligence, for those of you who are older, there were all these Polish jokes going around in the 60s and 70s, and the whole idea, these people are stupid, they're dunderheads and idiotic. When there are stereotypes like that, it's usually the opposite. Usually they're smart and they're very resourceful. And this is true for Polish intelligence. Polish intelligence by professionals, and I read articles about this, are during World War II, leading up to World War II, were held in high regard, even by British intelligence, SIS. Yeah, Polish intelligence is the best, because they were right out there. They were in the midst of it, and Polish intelligence in World War II allowed the British to take credit for a lot of what they did, because they did not want to give away their position, that they had access to this information. So a lot of what you see as British triumphs, MI6 and SIS triumphs, were actually generated from Polish intelligence. So they had this tradition, and they had this tradition going back when they were part of the larger um, Habsburgian, pre-modern, let's say, just verging on modernity empires, right? Along with the Romanovs, the Russian Empire, so they had that tradition. But in the modern period, certainly by World War I, Polish intelligence was very, very strong, and it's strong today in 2021. So you got the Polanski connection, and more immediately, there is another Polish American, well, he's French citizen, but he's kind of like an honorary American, right? Polanski, right? That's where most of his supporters are in the film community, despite his being ostracized and kicked out of the Academy. People like Meryl Streep insist that, yes, let Roman Polanski, free. Let him come back into America, United States. Well, there's another Polish literary person, an artist by the name of Jerzy Kosinski. And he was this guy that we were all reading back then, The Painted Bird, all these great fictions about how his family was rounded up by the Nazis and his whole family was exterminated. It sounds very much like the Roman Polanski legend. But this was years ago now, but I was shocked when Jerzy Kosinski was outed. He was exposed as a literary fraud along the lines of your J.D. Salinger and the people that come out of the Iowa workshop, right? Because, writers, CIA, Paris, France, there's books on how the intelligence, not just American intelligence organizations, use literary people in order to act as intelligence people, or to put across an ideological message. So Jerzy Kosinski was proven as a fraud. He didn't even write those books. He hired some underemployed people from the Iowa creative, right? Unemployed PhD types, literary people who had talent, but they wouldn't give a contract. Is okay, you help Kosinski here, spice it up, punch it up a bit, put some local humor in here, and we're going to put it under Jerzy Kosinski's name, and we're going to portray him as this refugee from Nazism. He's going to be a testament. He's part of what Norm Finkelstein would call, he's a professor of history, I guess, and he was pushed out of his job at the University of Notre Dame thanks to people who were attacking him. But he wrote a book called The Holocaust Industry, and he talks about how films, literature, novels, magazines, and there's a whole complex here that created an industry to present a certain view of World War II and its aftermath. So we have all these different elements, and there's probably more there that we're going to uncover. But first of all, we've made the first step. We're seeing that there's a whole gap of knowledge, information, and insight into the career of one Roman Polanski. He's more than Rosemary's Baby. He's more than the aggrieved husband of Sharon Tate. He is a person who's alive and well today, who helped in his capacity as a filmmaker, an international filmmaker, who got a passport. He got a free pass, right? He is a character who is one of those artists who have been instrumental in bringing here for us 2021, the lockdown world, right? This evil. That's why I call him the documentarian of evil. He helped to lay the groundwork for what we're seeing today in 2021. And for that reason, and we're going to find more information, we're going to be able to document this in time, just like we were able to find out about Joan Rivers' husband and Anthony Bourdain's father. For that, and for the fact that he is a serial sex criminal by his own admission, and likes it and doesn't apologize for it. And so it's a cultural thing. We do this in France. For that reason, and plus the reason that he helped to degrade world culture and to attack women in general, not just these victims, but it's attack on all human beings, really, the humiliation supposedly of this victim of the Holocaust, right? This guy here, so that allows him to behave in such a manner. For those reasons, the name Roman Polanski will live in infamy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention. I wish you a productive weekend. I'll probably be doing a little bit more audio readings. I feel really ambitious right now after having come up with these new linkages so far as Polanski is concerned. And as a parting word, I'm thinking about having a Patreon discussion about our favorite horror films or urban legends leading up to Halloween. Okay. So keep that in the back of your mind. I have a bunch of urban legends about UC Davis that I'd like to share with you. So Tyrone, I see, you're one of the Patreons, and ECAT, I believe you are. But if you're not, you can join or not. But I'd like to have a larger group because I want to hear from you. I want to hear your take on Polanski, and I want to hear your urban legends because, as we're finding out, Rosemary's Baby was not purely fiction. It was not an urban legend that Ira Levin, the author, simply wrote up. By the way, Ira Levin also wrote Stepford Wives. All right. I didn't know that. I mean, I think I read it somewhere, but I didn't follow. So I ordered it. I have to read Stepford Wives. I want to find out about Ira Levin. Please help me. There's not very much biographical information on one Ira Levin. I suspect he was also out of intelligence. He might have been OSS, right? Like, if not OSS, some sort of army intelligence like Heinz Kissinger or J.D. Salinger or perhaps an asset like Jerzy Kosinski, older, of course, but nonetheless an intelligence-connected artist, writer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate it. My Kathy Sue says my extras in Patreon, they are fantastic. I send you some wild PDFs. That's why I want to have the bigger meetings, because I'm just talking to a microphone here. I can see the feedback. Thank you very much on the live chat. But I want to see your beautiful smiling faces, and we want to just chop it up in the it'll probably be Zoom. I subscribe to Zoom, and we'll meet there again later this month to celebrate Halloween the way we will, not the way the Satanists do. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon. Bye.